Good morning, boys and girls. As you can tell, I'm in the classroom today. Teachers have been back for a couple of days now, cleaning up our classroom, getting ready for you guys for next year. A lot of exciting things going to happen when you guys come back to school. I can't wait. So, let's finish our book today. Chapter 23. It was the longest day, mindlessly hot, unspeakably hot, too hot to move or even think. The countryside, the village of Treegrap, the wood, all day defeated. Nothing stirred. The sun was a ponderous circle without edges, a roar without sound, a blazing glare so thorough and remorseless that even in the Fosters' parlor, with curtains drawn, it seemed an actual presence. You could not shut it out. Winnie's mother and grandmother sat plaintive all afternoon in the parlor, fanning themselves and sipping lemonade, their hair unsettled and their knees loose. It was totally unlike them, the lapse for gentility, and it made them more interesting. But Winnie didn't stay with them. Instead, she took her own brimming glass to her room and sat in her little rocker by the window. Once she had hidden Jessie's bottle in a bureau drawer, there was nothing to do but wait. In the hall outside her room, the grandfather's clock clicked deliberately, unimpressed with anyone's impatience, and Winnie found herself rocking to its rhythm, forward, back, tick-tock, tick-tock. She tried to read, but it was so quiet that she couldn't concentrate, and so she was glad when it was time for supper. It was something to do, though none of them could manage more than a nibble. But later, when Winnie went out again to the fence, she saw that the sky was changing. It was not so much clouding up as thickening somehow from every distance at once, the blank blue gone to haze. And then as the sun sank reluctantly behind the treetops, the haze hardened to a brilliant brownish yellow. In the wood, the leaves turned underside up, giving the trees a silvery cast. The air was noticeably heavier. It pressed on Winnie's chest and made her breathing difficult. She turned and went back to the cottage. "It's going to rain, I think," she told the prostrate group in the parlor, and the news was received with little moans of gratitude. Everyone went to bed early, closing windows firmly on their way, for outside, though it was almost dark, shreds of the hard brown-yellow light lingered on the rims of things, and there was a wind beginning. Small gusts and rattled the fence gate and set the trees to rustling. The smell of rain hung sweet in the air. "What a week this has been," said Winnie's grandmother. "Well, thank the Lord, it's almost over." And Winnie thought to herself, "Yep, it's almost over." Then there were 3 hours to wait before midnight with nothing to do. Winnie wandered restlessly around her room, sat in her rocker, lay on her bed, counted the ticks of the hall clock. Beneath her excitement, she was thick with guilt. For the second time in 3 short days, though there seemed many more than that, she was about to do something which she knew would be forbidden. She didn't have to ask. Winnie had her own strong sense of rightness. She knew that she could always say afterwards, "Well, you never told me not to." But how silly that would be. Of course, it would never occur to them to include such a thing on their list of don'ts. She could hear them saying and almost smile, "Now remember, Winifred, don't bite your fingernails, don't interrupt when someone else is speaking, and don't go to a jailhouse at midnight to change places with prisoners." Still, it wasn't really funny. What would happen in the morning when the constable found her in the cell and had to bring her home for the second time? What would they say? Would they ever trust her again? Winnie squirmed, sitting in the rocker, and swallowed uncomfortably. Well, she would have to make them understand somehow, without even explaining. The hall clock chimed 11. Outside, the wind had stopped. Everything, it seemed, was waiting. Winnie lay down and closed her eyes. Thinking of Tuck and May, or Miles and Jessie, her heart softened. They needed her, to take care of them. For in a funny sort of way, they had struck her at first. They were helpless, or too trusting. Well, something like that. Anyway, they needed her. She would not disappoint them. May would go free. No one would have to find out. Winnie would not have to find out. And May could not. But Winnie blocked the picture from her mind, the horror that would prove the secret. Instead, she turned her thoughts to Jessie. When she was 17, would she? If it was true, would she? And if she did, would she be sorry afterwards? Tuck had said, it's something you don't find out how you feel until afterwards. But no, it wasn't true. She knew that now, here in her own bedroom. They were probably crazy after all, but she loved them anyway. They needed her, and thinking this, when he fell asleep. She worked with a jerk some time later and sat up alarmed. The clock was ticking steadily. The darkness was complete. Outside, the night seemed poised on tiptoe, waiting, holding its breath for the storm. Winnie stole out to the hall and frowned at the clock face in the shadows. and at last she could make it out, for the black Roman numerals were just barely visible against their white ground. The brass hands glowed faintly. As she appeared at them, the long hand snapped forward one more notch with a loud click. She had not missed her moment. It was 5 minutes to midnight. Leaving the house was so easy that Winnie felt faintly shocked. She had half expected that the instant she put her foot on the stairs they would leap from their beds and surround her with accusations. But no one stirred, and she was struck by the realization that if she chose, she could slip out night after night without their knowing. The thought made her feel more guilty than ever that she could once more take advantage of their trust. But tonight, this one last time, she had to. There was no other way. She opened the door and slipped out into the heavy August night. Leaving the cottage was like leaving something real and moving into a dream. Her body felt weightless, and she seemed to float down the path to the gate. Jessie was there waiting. Neither of them spoke. He took her hand and they ran together, lightly down the road past other sleeping cottages, into the dim and empty center of the village. The big glass windows here were lidded eyes that didn't care. They barely saw them, barely gave them back reflections. The blacksmith shop, the mill, the church, the stores, so busy and alive in daylight, were hunched, deserted now, dark piles and shapes without a purpose or a meaning. And then ahead, when he saw the jailhouse, its new wood still unpainted, lamplight spilling through a window at the front, and there in the clear door behind it, like the great L upside down, were the gallows. The sky flashed white, but this time it wasn't heat lightning, for a few moments later a low mumble, still far away, announced the coming storm. A fresh breeze lifted Winnie's hair, and from somewhere in the village behind them a dog barked. Two shadows detached themselves from the loom as Jessie and Winnie came up. Tuck pulled her to him and hugged her hard, and Miles squeezed her hand. No one said a word. Then the four of them crept to the back of the building. Here, too high for Winnie to see into, was a barred window through which, from the room in front, light glowed faintly. Winnie peered up at it as the blackness of the bars with the dim gold of the light between. Into her head came lines from an open poem. Stone walls do not a prisoner make, no iron bars a cage. Over and over the lines repeated themselves in her head that they were altogether meaningless. Another roll of thunder sounded. The storm was moving nearer. Then Miles was standing on a box. He was pouring oil around the frame of the window. A swirl of wind brought the thick, rich smell of it down to Winnie's nostrils. Tuck handed up a tool, and Miles began to pry at the nails securing the window frame. Miles knew carpentering. Miles could do the job. Winnie shivered and held right tight to Jessie's hand. One nail was free, another. Tuck reached up to receive them as if they came out one by one. A fourth nail screeched as it was pried up, and Miles poured on more oil. From the front of the jailhouse, the constable yawned noisily and began to whistle. The whistling came nearer. Miles dropped down. They heard the constable's footsteps coming up to May's cell. The bar door clanked. Then the footsteps receded, the whistling grew fainter, an inner door shut, and the lamp glow disappeared. At once Miles was up again and prying at the nails. An eighth was out, a ninth, a 10th. Winnie counted carefully, while behind her counting, Mine sang, "Stone walls do not a prison make." Miles handed down the prying tool. He grasped the bars of the window firmly, ready to pull, and stood poised. What is he waiting for? Thought Winnie. Why doesn't he? Then a flash of lightning, and soon after a crack of thunder. In the midst of the noise, Miles gave a heavy heave. But the window did not budge. The thunder ebbed. Winnie's heart sank. What if it was all impossible? What if the window would never come out? What if? She looked over her shoulder at the dark shape of the gallows and shuddered. Again a flash of lightning, and the time a crashing burst of noise from the swirling sky. Miles yanked. The window frame sprang free, and still grasping it by the bars, he tumbled backward off the box. The job was done. Two arms appeared in the hole left by the missing frame. May! Her head appeared. It was too dark to see her face. The window. What if it was too small for her to squeeze through? What if? But now her shoulders were out, she groaned softly. Another flash of lightning lit her face for an instant, and Winnie saw an expression there of deep concentration. Tip of tongue protruding, brows furrowed. Now Tuck was on the box, helping her, giving her his own shoulders to pull on. Miles and Jessie close at his sides, arms upstretched, eager to receive her bulk. Her hips were free. Now, look out! Here she came, her skirts tearing on the rough edges of the boards, arms flailing, and they were all in a heap on the ground. Another crash of thunder muffled Jessie's bursting, exultant laugh. May was free. Winnie clasped her trembling hands thankfully, and then the first drop of rain plopped precisely on the tip of her nose. The tucks untangled themselves and turned to her. One by one, as the rain began, they drew her to them and kissed her. One by one, she kissed them back. Was it rain on May's face, on Tuck's, or was it tears? Jessie was last. He put his arms around her and hugged her tight and whispered the single word, remember? Then Miles was on the box again, lifting her. Her hands grasped the edge of the window. This time she waited with them. When the thunder came, it tore the skyport with its roar, and as it came, she pulled herself through and dropped to the cot inside, unharmed. She looked up at the open square and saw the frame with Miles' hands holding it. The next obliging roll of thunder saw it wedged once more in place, and then would Miles put back the nails? She waited. Rain came in sheets now, riding the wind flung cross-side through the night. Lightning crackled, a brilliant, jagged streak of thunder rattled the little building. The tension in the perched earth eased and vanished when he felt it go. The muscles of her stomach loosened, and all at once she was exhausted. Still she waited. Would Miles put back the nails? At last, standing tiptoe on the cot, she grasped the bars on the window, pulling herself up until she could just see through. Rain blew into her face, but at the next flash of lightning, looking down, she saw that the yard was empty. And before the thunder followed, in a pause while wind and rain held back for one brief moment, she thought she heard, fading in the distance, the tinkling little melody of the music box. The Tucks, her darling Tucks, were gone. The first week of August was long over, and now through autumn was still some weeks away. There was a feeling that the year had begun its downward arc, that the wheel was turning again, slowly now, but soon to go faster, turning once more in the changeless sweep of change. Winnie, standing at the fence in front of the Touch-Me-Not cottage, could hear the new note in the voices of the birds. Whole clouds of them lifted, chattering into the sky above the wood, and then settled only to lift again. Across the road, goldenrod was coming into bloom. At the end, early dying milkweed had opened its rough pod, exposing a host of downy heaped seeds. As she watched, one of these detached itself into the sudden breeze and sailed sedately off, while others leaned from the pod as if to observe its departure. Winnie dropped down cross-legged on the grass. 2 weeks had gone by since the night of the storm, the night of May Tuck's escape, and May had not been found. There was no trace of her at all, of Tucks or Miles or Jessie. Winnie was profoundly grateful for that, but she was also profoundly tired. It had been a trying 2 weeks. For the 100th time she reviewed it all, how the constable had come into the cell soon after she had settled on her cot, how he had let her down a shutter over the window to keep out the rain, how then he had stood over her as she hunched under a blanket, her trying to look as large as possible, how finally he had gone away and not come back till morning. But she had not dared to sleep for fear she would kick off the blanket and give herself away, give the Tucks away unwittingly. She had then laid there, pulse thudding, eyes wide open. She would never forget the rattle of the rain on the jailhouse roof, or the smell of the wet wood, or the darkness that had saved them all, or how difficult it was not to cough. She had wanted to cough as soon as it occurred to her that she mustn't, and she passed a long hour trying to swallow away any tickle that perversely constricted her throat. And she would never forget the crash outside that made her heart race, that she could not investigate and did not understand till morning, when on the way home she saw the gallows had blown over in the wind. But oh, it made her tremble still to remember the constable's face when he found her. She had heard a bustling in the front of the jail and smelled fresh coffee and sat up, stiff with apprehension. Then the inner door opened, the door she now saw which separated the office from the pair of cells, and in the light that steamed before him the constable appeared carrying a breakfast tray. He was whistling cheerfully. He came to the barred door of her cell and looked in, and the whistling died on his lips as if he had run down and needed to be wound up again. But this comical astonishment lasted for a moment only, and then his face flushed red with anger. Winnie had sat on the cot, eyes downcast, feeling very small and very much like a criminal. In fact, he was soon shouting that if she were older, she'd have kept her there, that it was a crime that she had done. She was an accomplice. He had helped a murderer escape. She was, in fact, a criminal, but too young to be punished by the law. Worse luck, he told her, for she badly needed punishing. She was then released into the custody of her mother and father, and these new words, accomplice and custody, chilled her blood. Over and over they asked her, shocked at first and then wistful, why she had done such a thing. Why? She was their daughter. They had trusted her. They had tried to bring her up properly with a true sense of right and wrong they did not understand, and finally she had sobbed the only truth that was in her mother's shoulder, the only explanation. The Tucks were her friends. She had done it because, in spite of everything, she loved them. This of all things her family understood, and afterwards they drew together staunchly around her. It was hard for them in the village. Winnie knew it was, and the knowledge gave her pain, for they were proud, and she had shamed them. Still, the sight of the affair was not without its benefits, at least for Winnie. Though she was confined to the yard indefinitely and could go nowhere, not even with her mother and her grandmother, the other children wandered by to look at her, to talk to her through the fence. They were impressed by what she had done. She was a figure of romance to them now, where before she was just been too neat, too prissy, almost somehow too clean to be a real friend. Winnie sighed and plucked at the grass around her ankles. School would soon open. It wouldn't be so bad. In fact, she thought that her spirits lifted this year. It might be rather nice. And then two things happened. First of all, the toad appeared out of the weeds on her side of the road this time. It bounced over out of a cover of dandelion leaves and landed plop just beyond the fence. If she had reached her hand through the bars, she could have touched it. And next, a brown dog with easy gait and dangling tongue came lopping down the road toward them. He stopped opposite the fence and looked at Winnie with a friendly swish of his tail, and then he saw the toad. And once he began to bark, his eyes bright. He pranced up, his hindquarters leaped independently from side to side, nose close to the toad, his voice shrill with enthusiasm. "Don't!" cried Winnie, leaping to her feet and flapping her arms. "Go away, dog! Stop that! Go away! Shoo!" The dog paused. He looked up at Winnie's frantic dancing, and then he looked at the toad, who had pressed down close to the dirt, his eyes tied shut. It was too much for him. He began to bark again and reached out a long paw. "Oh!" cried Winnie. "Oh, don't do that! Leave my toad alone!" And before she had time to realize what she was doing, she bent, reached through the bars, and snatched the toad up away from the horn, dropping it onto the grass inside the fence. A feeling of revulsion swept through her. While the dog whined, pausing uselessly at the fence, she stood rigid, staring at the toad, wiping her hand again and again on the shirt of her dress. And then she remembered the actual feel of the toad, and the revulsion passed. She knelt and touched the skin of its back. It was rough and soft both at once, and cool. When he stood and looked at the dog, he was waiting outside the fence, his head on one side, peering at her lovingly. "It's my toad," Winnie told, "so you'd better leave it alone." And then on impulse, she turned and ran into the cottage, up to her room, to the bureau drawer where she had hidden Jessie's bottle, the bottle of water from the spring. In a moment she was back again. The toad still squatted where she had dropped. The dog still waited at the fence. Winnie pulled out the cork from the mouth of the bottle, and kneeling, she poured the precious water very slowly and carefully over the toad. The dog watched this operation, and then, yawning, he was suddenly bored. He turned and loped away back down the road to the village. Winnie picked up the toad and held it for a long time, without the least disgust, in the palm of her hand. It sat calmly, blinking, and the water glistened on its back. The little bottle was empty now. It lay on the grass at Winnie's feet. But if all of it was true, there was no water in the wood. There was plenty more, just in case, when she was 17, if she would decide there was no more water in the wood. If she should decide there was more water in the wood. Winnie smiled, and she stopped and put her hand through the fence and set the toad free. "There," she said, "you're safe, forever." So she wasted her water on the toad. But she always knew that there was more water, and she knew where to find it. It'd be interesting. So the story really didn't quite end, right? So, I hope that you guys really enjoyed the book. I did. Kind of made you think, right? To not take advantage of the time that you have here on Earth, and to do the things that you know are right, and you have to make difficult decisions. I hope you guys have a great summer, and hopefully I will see you very soon. I miss you guys. Have a great summer. Bye.